Eagle's Nest Sinkhole, widely regarded as the Mount Everest of cave diving, is one of the most impressive cave dive sites in the world. The cave is known due to its stunning views, extreme depth, and remote location. The views may be breathtaking, but precaution is required because numerous divers haven't seen daylight again after entering the Eagle's Nest. Eagle's Nest Sinkhole is located within the Chassahowitzka Wildlife Management Area in west central Florida, and it has an amazing underwater cave system. From the surface, it doesn't look very fascinating. It looks like it's filled with alligators, and the swarms of mosquitoes and ticks above the surface can be annoying. You can barely find any sign that a beautiful world exists within this irritating pond. You can't judge a book by its cover. And this is indeed true of Eagle's Nest. If you are to look at the conditions surrounding the surface, you'll never behold the elegance of nature below it. You can call it a dangerous beauty. Of course, it is beautiful within, yet it can be dangerous right inside the cave too. What are those discouraging things at the surface of this sinkhole? At the surface, the water has a greenish color. It is dark and difficult to see through. Unlike the nearby Buford Springs and Weeki Wachee, which have crystal clear waters, it's just as though it is the home for alligators, mosquitoes, and ticks. Even with all these discouraging sights on the surface, there are a handful of professional divers who have made their way into the underwater cave systems. To them, the Eagle's Nest is indeed a paradise. It's an admirable, top-notch underwater cave system. The visibility in this sinkhole depends greatly on the present situation, that is, the condition of the Florida aquifer and the prevailing amount of rainfall. At the Eagle's Nest Sinkhole is a message board that shows different diving conditions encountered by divers who have previously dived there. Unlimited visibility and diving by braille, with zero visibility, are the major conditions stated on the message board. Many times when you get to this sinkhole, you'll discover that it's been covered with tannin. Tannin is a natural organic coloring dye. It makes the water turn darker than usual. In some favorable conditions, the water can sometimes be gin clear. When you dare to enter it, it's like you're in a different world entirely. It is fascinating, magnificent, and risky all at the same time. Eagle's Nest Sinkhole is only advisable for those who are qualified and experienced because it's a dreadful cave diving site. Another caution you need to take is finding your way within the cave system. You can easily miss your way. It is a vicious and unappeasable sinkhole. Though it is recommended for professional divers alone, such divers must still receive information from people who have dived there before, or even have them as guides, so that they can be aware of the likely situation of things to face within the cave. When entering the Eagle's Nest cave systems, you have to squeeze yourself into the tight, narrow 70-foot-long passages. Oftentimes, there are many challenges to entering with your diving gear. There are large caverns that are described with magnificent names, such as Ballroom, Super Room, and the Pit. The ballroom is a vast chamber that leads to small dark passages that can reach 300 feet deep in some places. The combination of total darkness and extreme depths, combined with the complicated cave network, makes it an extremely advanced dive. At least 13 divers have dived there since 1981. From 1999 to 2003, the site was closed to divers. A large green sign posted near the sink alerts divers to the danger. On September 11, 2005, Judy Bedard and her longtime boyfriend Rudy Banks were set for the dive adventure to the fascinating cave systems of Eagle's Nest Sinkhole. Judy Bedard was a 48-year-old cave diver. She was a diver with a difference and had several diving adventures with her friends in the past. Judy was a certified diver. She was also a registered nurse who worked at Tampa General Hospital and lived in Tampa, Florida. Judy and Rudy entered the water at 4:30 p.m. After a few minutes, they began the dive. When entering Eagle's Nest, what awaits below the surface of the Eagle's Nest is a stunning world-class underwater cave system. It consists of a labyrinth descending 300 feet below the Earth's surface. The intricate network of pathways extends for over a mile, and it's so amazing that it can be unsafe. The cave system has a downstream tunnel with plenty of rooms that are at least 300 feet deep, and there is also a stretch of the cavern between two of the rooms in this tunnel called the pit. It's called the pit because the tunnel dips to 300 feet. Judy and Rudy had just begun their dive, taking a slightly slow descent into the cave. Judy was using an oxygen-only tank until she reached 30 feet. She switched to her nitrox tank at this depth. That's a mixture of oxygen and nitrogen. She needed to switch because diving requires different mixes of gas at different depths. The dive was going smoothly until they got to a depth of 130 feet. She began to have some difficulties. Her equipment began to develop some technical problems. At this depth, she switched to her trimix tank, a primary tank, which contained a mixture of oxygen, nitrogen, and helium. This primary tank is the one needed for the depth she had just reached. But unfortunately, the primary tank didn't contain the right proportion of these three gases. Seeing the situation, Banks said Judy switched back to her nitrox tank. Because of this, both divers began to ascend back to the surface. Ascending in cave diving is supposed to be a progressive process and not a quick process in order to avoid decompression sickness, which is also called bends. Fast decompression can also cause gas embolism. Embolism is when blood circulation is obstructed due to the presence of bubbles or a blood clot in the bloodstream. At this point, time is not on their side to embark on a slow decompression. Because of the mistake in her primary tank mixes, Judy had been breathing more helium than necessary and almost zero oxygen. By the time they reached 100 feet, Judy had become unconscious. However, her breath ceased when they got to 60 feet away from the surface. At this point, Rudy wasn't sure of what option to choose. Judy is dying, and they're still 60 feet away from the surface. If he takes a fast ascent, it'll aggravate Judy's traumatic condition because her body was already deficient in oxygen. If he takes a slow ascent, Judy will eventually die due to lack of oxygen. The former is preferable. She has hope of getting over the decompression sickness rather than dying right within the cave. So Rudy took a very fast ascent, and up at the surface, he brought her out. Now he needed help resuscitating Judy. Who would be of help? Greg Stanton, a former diving safety officer at Florida State University, and his friend James Gary, a member of the University of South Florida's Diving Control Board, came to help Rudy after returning from their dives. Greg reported that it is quite unfortunate that it was the ascent that began a kaleidoscope of challenges and the injuries under which she now struggles. She also had arterial gas embolisms. When she reached the surface, Judy did not have any pulse. Her eyes were open and blood and foam were coming out of her mouth. James stopped Dan Pelland, a Spring Hill resident who was coming to Eagle's Nest for some photographs. Using Pelland's phone, James called 911. Pelland helped Rudy carry out CPR on Judy. Because of the state Judy was in, CPR, or cardiopulmonary resuscitation, was needed at this point. It's a medical technique used to revive someone whose heart has stopped beating, a life-saving emergency technique. Judy's heart came back to life 15 to 20 minutes after they began CPR. Her breathing was restored with CPR, but she was yet to regain consciousness. She needed urgent medical attention, but help was not readily available at the moment. The major limitations to getting recovery help at the Eagle's Nest Sinkhole are the fact that it's located in a remote area and that it has an unpaved entrance. Though the roads are improved, they are still somewhat rough. They are still left with large potholes, and it's very difficult to get help at this site in case of an accident. As regards the case of Judy, inadequacy in supplies and transportation challenges greatly affected the response from the medical team. They had to rush the victim with a sport utility vehicle on a backboard without an IV drip. The ambulance and helicopter were waiting at the edge of the forest to take Judy to the hospital. Stephen Farmer, a fish and wildlife investigator, made 3 statements regarding the reasons Judy became badly injured at the cave site, agreeing with the words of Greg and James, saying, her trimix tanks had poorly mixed gases. There was a poor analysis of the proportion of gases in her tanks. The isolation valve, which is attached to the manifold that connects the two tanks, was left closed, and she didn't check it to ensure it was open. Some professionals said that Judy was responsible for her equipment. All divers must check their breathing gases before starting their dive. Had she tested the isolation valve, she would have noticed that the tanks were not evenly pressured and probably wouldn't have led to further problems, leading to her canceling the dive. Rudy was unhappy all through that period and was unable to get comfortable because of Judy's health. Judy was flown to Shands and her status was classified as serious. In the first few weeks, expectations for recovery were very low. The doctors were amazed at Judy's survival for the first 24 hours after the dive. Her kidneys failed, and she experienced multiple heart attacks after being taken out of a hyperbaric chamber to treat the air embolisms. Hyperbaric oxygen therapy is an effective method carried out to increase the rate at which gas bubbles are removed by the lungs. Friends and other divers who know Judy as vibrant find it to be a difficult reality. She was a cheerful person who was fun to be around. It was unfortunate that such a fate befell her. Judy was transported to Tampa General Hospital where she began to rehab. Her full consciousness didn't return until November, 2 months after the incident. Judy said, "I remember waking up. I couldn't move. My legs had atrophied. I had on a tracheostomy tube. I thought, oh my God." During her time in the hospital, Judy had suffered from cardiac arrest, respiratory failure, multiple organ complications, cognitive erosion, and post-traumatic amnesia. Usually, a patient who suffered so much trauma would most likely survive with neurological damage, physical limitations in the arms and legs, and potentially paralysis. When she started, Judy required assistance getting into and out of bed. She struggled to maintain her equilibrium. She was out of breath after approximately 10 steps, even with the aid of a walker with wheels. She underwent months of intense therapy. After around 5 weeks, she was able to walk more than 300 feet. She had a fortunate life story, and one of her doctors described her recovery as miraculous. Also, her former physical therapist on the brain injury team at the rehabilitation center said, "For what she had, it was one of the best outcomes I've ever seen." Judy had outpatient therapy for an additional 6 months after being discharged from the hospital in January 2006. She spent that time regaining her strength, flexibility, and coordination. The next summer, Judy accomplished something that had previously seemed unimaginable. She went with Rudy, now her husband, on an open water dive in the Gulf of Mexico, right off the coast of Newport Richey. As she laid in bed during the months of her rehabilitation, she had been dreaming of it. In June 2007, she went back to work at Tampa General as an operating room nurse, but she eventually made the decision to go to the medical records division. Judy wanted to spend more time diving and didn't want to put in a lot of overtime. Judy resumed her exploration of underwater caverns after shaking off some rust and a load of anxieties. Several places, including Peacock Springs in North Florida, have been attempted by her. On Christmas morning in 2014, Darren Spivey, a 35-year-old Brooksville resident and a roofer by profession, went for a dive at Eagle's Nest together with his son Dylan Sanchez, 15 years old. They received new dive equipment as presents and could not wait to try it out. Darren has had a knack for diving since childhood. He'd always grab a couple of his friends whenever he was free for the weekend and go for a swim. Although he was a certified diver, he didn't have any special cave diving certifications. With his certification, he could dive anything from 0 to 130 feet. Besides, you only need regular air in your tanks and no special equipment for that depth. Divers who dive deeper than 130 feet will almost certainly require special air in their tanks, specialized equipment, and additional training. 6 months before the Christmas morning dive, Darren was introduced to Robert Brooks, an experienced cave diver. Robert stated, "When he approached me to be his mentor, I told him I couldn't take him caving until he got his cave card." Robert also stated that he loaned Darren some equipment and encouraged him to take a course to become certified, but he continued to put it off. Seeing his dad diving for almost 9 years, Dylan also liked to go for a dive with his father. Darren's mother, Sylvia Spivey, said that Dylan, a freshman at Hernando High School who was enrolled in the junior ROTC program, developed the same passion. He spent hours poring over dive manuals in preparation for his certification. He'd found his niche, Sylvia Spivey said. His father would put him through drills to ensure he knew everything like the back of his hand. It was not the first time they were about to dive into Eagle's Nest. According to family members, Darren and his son had dived at Eagle's Nest several times and were aware of the dangers. The main thing on their minds was safety, said Darren's fiancée, Holly King. They never tried to force it. Darren adored his family and his children and would risk everything for them. It all started normally. Darren and Dylan left home at 7 a.m. to test out new diving equipment at Beaufort Springs, but found out it was flooded, so they decided to drive down to Eagle's Nest Sink. They arrived at around 11 a.m. at a parking lot in front of a wooden dock. This wooden dock had several signs warning visitors of the impending dive. Despite the warnings, Darren and his son donned their scuba gear and waddled across the dock to the water. They jumped in the water, swam for a while, and dove further until they reached the Eagle's Nest entrance room. Darren attempted to reassure Robert Brooks, his mentor, that he would remain in Eagle's Nest entrance room, a large cavern known as the ballroom that reaches depths of about 200 feet, rather than entering the narrower tunnels. According to Robert, the ballroom is still a dangerous place for a diver who hasn't had professional cave training, because the ballroom is a dark room that has a set of caves down below. It is quite easy to get lost there. In fact, there is a large sign, "Stop, prevent your death," which warns the divers. The ballroom divides into two small caves from the sign. These caves can reach a depth of 300 feet at some points. Darren and his son passed the Eagle's Nest entrance and followed a narrow and long tunnel in the middle of the pond, descending deep into the earth. Usually, divers would grab a guideline to help them navigate the cave system's narrow entry point, which served as the only entrance and exit. Because the water inside was frequently murky, the guideline was required. Once inside this narrow passageway, divers would swim until they couldn't see any sunlight anymore. After diving into the tube, they entered the main ballroom, and Darren kept diving in the ballroom with his son and did not have any problem. But things were about to change for the worse. They kept diving deeper within the cavern, knowing that their oxygen won't last that long. The pair would have needed about an hour to decompress due to their reached depth, rising slowly enough that the air didn't form bubbles in their blood, causing decompression sickness. According to Robert Brooks, they didn't appear to have enough air in their tanks for that process. Dives to that depth also necessitate a mixture in which helium replaces some of the nitrogen in the air. This helps reduce the narcotic effect of nitrogen, which becomes stronger at depths greater than 100 feet. Darren and his son, according to Robert, were using simple compressed air. Darren's fiancée, Holly, hadn't heard from him or his son in several hours, so as the sun set, she decided to drive there herself to look for them. Darren texted her just before the boys got in the water to tell her where they were diving. Holly discovered his car near the dock. She decided to call the cops, fearing the worst. Around 7:30 p.m., Holly called the sheriff's office. When Brooks learned of the missing divers, he contacted 2 other certified cave divers to assist in the search. The police responded quickly and brought recovery divers with them, who were trained to look for missing divers. They decided to go into the Eagle's Nest just in case Darren and Dylan got stuck. They followed the guideline into the ballroom through the narrow passage. The divers came to a halt just outside the passage and shined their flashlights up at the ceiling. Divers were frequently trapped near the entrance of underwater caves. Between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m., at a depth of 67 feet, one of the divers discovered Dylan's body floating against the ballroom ceiling. Father Darren's body was discovered at a depth of 127 feet on a large mound on the ballroom floor. According to Brooks, their dive computers and air gauges showed that they had both descended to 233 feet and had run out of air. Dylan first, apparently, because his father had deployed a long breathing hose that allowed his son to breathe from his tank. Father and son died there on Christmas Day. According to authorities, they drowned by accident. An investigation into what went wrong was underway the next day. According to Robert Brooks, who assisted in his recovery, the drownings appear to result from a diver who attempted to go beyond his training and experience. "The sad thing is," I told him, "one night they'll call me to come get you," Brooks explained. According to Brooks, Darren had taken great care in setting up the equipment they used, but their lack of experience and proper gear in a place like Eagle's Nest proved fatal. "They were doomed from the beginning," he said. Darren and Dylan's gauges indicated that they had dropped to 230 feet. They were undoubtedly unprepared to handle such a dive. They didn't have the proper gas mixture in their tanks to breathe at such depths. They also lacked the necessary training and equipment, as previously stated. Their deaths were investigated, and it was assumed that the pair had followed the guideline to the ballroom's bottom. Then they descended into one of the two caves, reaching a depth of 230 feet. It was thought that they developed a condition known as nitrogen narcosis. This happens when divers descend below 100 feet. Without getting too technical, nitrogen narcosis is a drowsy feeling experienced by divers caused by high-pressure air. It can make divers feel drunk and impair judgment, which is extremely dangerous when diving in deep water. Darren and Dylan could have easily lost track of time and how much air they were using if they were in that state. It was assumed that they had run out of oxygen by the time they returned to the ballroom. Investigators believed the son was the first to run out of air. Dylan had to have shown his father his air gauge, which was low. Darren most likely took out his regulator and placed it in his son's mouth as they attempted to leave Eagle's Nest. On the other hand, Darren's tank would have run out of air very quickly after this. Darren, it is assumed, passed out from a lack of oxygen and sank to the cave's floor. Dylan must have taken one last deep breath of air before attempting to swim to the surface. He used his water wings to propel himself forward. They must have lost the guideline in their panic, and Dylan could not find the exit. Darren Spivey and Dylan Sanchez died tragically. They were not the first or last divers to die in this notorious underwater cave system. If you decide to visit this magnificent and terrifying cave, make sure to come prepared and stay safe. On Saturday morning, October 15, 2016, 3 divers went to the Eagle's Nest Sinkhole to experience life in its underwater cave system. 2 of these 3 divers, Patrick Peacock and Chris Rittenmeyer, came from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. They were both experienced cave divers who had dived in different cave systems in Florida, Mexico, and South America. This wasn't their first adventure to Eagle's Nest. They had dived into the cave system in the past. Patrick was a diving instructor. The third diver, Justin Blakely, had no experience diving and had no idea what the cave system looked like. He arrived at the Eagle's Nest earlier than his 2 friends, so he waited for them. Patrick, Chris, and Justin arrived safely at the Eagle's Nest Sinkhole, and they started their dive around 2 p.m. on Saturday, October 15, 2016. They all had their scuba gear with them, and they went straight to the entrance of the cave, which was covered with murky and unappealing water. Patrick and Chris, being experienced divers, went into the dark cave system, exploring some of the rooms within the cave. Justin, who wasn't that experienced, decided to stay close to the surface. The 3 divers planned to reassemble at a particular place by 3 p.m., which was just an hour and a half after they started their dive. Justin, who was diving alone, returned after about half an hour to the agreed location. When he got there, he couldn't find the other 2 divers, so he returned to diving again. He spent about 30 minutes again and returned to the same location, yet the 2 weren't there. He continued waiting, all to no avail. Justin began to panic when he couldn't see his friends returning from their dives after some hours. He wasn't experienced, so searching for them isn't an option for him. He had to return to the surface to call for help. At about 6 p.m., Justin was able to get through to the police, and many people came to the scene when the report was sent abroad. Search teams were set to start their operations. The first search team, John Bernot and Charlie Roberson, commenced their dive at around 11 p.m. They were searching the upstream passages. The dive plan was reported by the third diver, Justin, to be along that upstream. When the first search team entered, they started observing the decompression habitat and discovered 3 bottles marked O2 at 20 feet. At about 70 feet, 4 bottles were staged. Also, they saw 2 bottles that were marked 120, staged downstream from the guideline at about 120 feet into the cave. But they went upstream according to the missing divers' dive plan. They did a comprehensive search throughout all the tunnels on the upstream side, but couldn't find the 2 divers. Then they returned to the entrance room, and from there, they searched through the tunnels downstream, together with the Lockwood Tunnel. There were no traces of the missing divers there. After a futile effort, the first search team returned to the surface at about 3:30 a.m. the following morning. The second search team, Ted McCoy and A.J. Gonzalez, started their dive around 3:45 a.m. They started with the downstream tunnels. Not long after their search began, they found the 2 bodies at an exit side of the pit, one of the largest rooms of the cave system. The second search team documented the details of the scene where the bodies were found, spending about 45 minutes doing that. From their observations, they discovered that one of the divers was still wearing his closed-circuit rebreather, but his bailouts were already displaced. Bailouts are underwater bottles used as an emergency gas supply in case the primary gas supply fails. They saw an empty gas cylinder beside him attached to his rig, and a long hose was also attached to it and was set up. His loop was out of his mouth and left open, and the hose that was on the inhale side was squeezed. Onboard O2 had 300 psi left, but the onboard diluent bottle was empty. He did not have a primary light head, and the backup lights were not well positioned. The scooter they found wasn't close to him, but it was unclipped and turned off. The second missing diver, whose body was found in almost the same place, had a dry suit on him, along with his mask and fins. He had a backup light turned off and dangling from his pocket. He was positively buoyant. He had no other bottles close to him. There was a full gas cylinder staged on the exit side of the pit confinement, though it was difficult to know if something was there. They saw that the missing primary lighthead was found in the same place. They found another full cylinder downstream of the jump to the Lockwood Tunnel. 2 of the 4 side-mounted bailouts were found downstream of the pit constraint but were empty. The second search team returned to the surface since their tasks were just to locate and document the details of the place the bodies were found. The following afternoon, which was Sunday, October 16, 2016, a team of 2 divers, Eric Deister and Colt Smith, went into the cave system with the details they'd gotten from the second search team to recover the bodies. They brought the 2 bodies out from around the pit exit side to the top of the ballroom. There were 2 other divers, Ken Salad and another diver, who were both waiting for the first recovery team. When they brought the bodies to them, they brought them to the surface. Another team then went to the scene on Monday, October 17, 2016, in the morning to recover every other piece of equipment that was left in the cave system. John Bernot, the diver from the first search team, and James Draker were the team members that went for this equipment recovery. They found 2 scooters, the second missing diver's rebreather, and a bailout bottle at the gold line outside the constraint that was leading to Revelation space. His closed-circuit rebreather loop was closed, but seemed to be fully operational. They removed all these and handed them over to the authorities for evidence and proper analysis. Patrick and Chris's deaths became a topic for debate for several years among divers. No documented analysis of the cause of Patrick and Chris's deaths is available for the public. However, Chuck Walls, a diving expert, speculated that the unfortunate incident was the result of nitrogen narcosis. Patrick and Chris were both found in the most dangerous and complex area of the cave, at a depth of 260 feet, suggesting that nitrogen narcosis could have been the cause of their deaths. Nitrogen narcosis tends to occur when divers reach depths of about 100 feet. It results in loss of consciousness, caused by a tranquilizing effect of some gases at high pressure. Anyone suffering from narcosis is not able to make the right judgment about his environment and will become confused. This oftentimes causes the divers to drown if they are not immediately able to surface or are not rescued. They considered Eagle's Nest to be a disastrous cave system that must be prohibited for further diving adventures, since several divers have been lost in this dangerous cave. The entrance to the cave had earlier been banned by the state in 1999, but was opened again in 2003. This was a result of pressure mounted upon the state authorities by the National Association for Cave Divers and the National Speleological Society Cave Diving Section. At this same Eagle's Nest cave system, 2 divers lost their lives in 2013 on a Christmas day. The father and son went to test their Christmas gifts and new air tanks. Darren Spivey, a certified diver, and his son, who was just 15 years old with not much experience, went into the cave to test their air tanks. To find out what happened, check out the video on our channel. We'd like to thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed watching, take a dive on the like and subscribe buttons and hit the bell icon so you get notified when we come back with another exciting cave diving story.